Pregame.com.
I'm Vegas Runner here with Bryan, Leonard. NBA is in a lockout, but we do have college basketball, which just tipped off. This is one of the best times of the season where you could really find some value, and I think nothing reflects that more than the fact bookmakers do not have confidence in their numbers. They're not willing to put out totals until later in the day, and you're seeing lines move 5, 6, 7, 8 points from the opening number. That tells you they're not very confident in the number, and the low limits lets you pretty much guarantee that's the fact. But it's a saturated market right now with mostly sharp bettors, guys like Bryan, because most recreational bettors are just tying in cross-sport parlays. They're betting college basketball when there's not football on. But I think these lines are aimed towards the sharper bettors. But it's early in the season. Odds makers' numbers aren't as sharp as they're going to be down the road. So I think you could take advantage of that. You have a really good concept I think you could use throughout the whole season on home court edge. And nothing's more important in college basketball than home court edge. So I'm going to pass it off to Bryan so you could explain some things, help you make some money this college basketball season.
Yeah, a lot of people, when you're doing your power ratings, and I would recommend anybody to, even if you don't have the time to do your own power ratings, get some power ratings from a good source. There's a lot of them out there on the internet. I know the Gold Sheet does them. Subscribe to the Gold Sheet. They do a nice job. But a lot of people, there's two different ways to look at it. You can look at, actually 3 different ways, because I started something different this year. You can look at an overall number. I've seen a lot of people use 4.5, 4.5, 5 as a traditional number. But as we know, every home court is different. You can use individual home courts, and we do this for football because there's only 120 teams. We can have individual team home field advantages in college football. But when you have 350 teams, it's hard to do individual home courts if you're doing it on a part-time basis, and even if you're doing it on a full-time basis when there's football going on. It's really tough for everybody. So I went this year and I went out and I looked at how conferences do, overall conferences, their home court value. And you can't use the entire schedule to do this because you're going to find Duke's are going to play East Tennessee State.
Right.
So it's going to throw everything off. So what you have to do is you have to look in conference.
Conference play,
For the most part, now you're going to have certain teams in every conference that are going to be much better than any others. You may have 1 or 2 that's worse. But overall, your teams are pretty equal in conference play. Every year you've got a different winner comes out of each conference. Now, you're going to have your Butlers or whatever that are going to be the cream of the crop, your VCUs, your George Masons, those kind of teams. But for the most part, if you're going to look at your home court value, you want to look at how these teams have done in that conference. And what I did was I went back the last 20 games. So it incorporated not only last year, but some of the prior year. And I went in and I took the points for and the points against on every team in these conferences, individual teams. And then I took all those teams in that conference, divided them in half. And then, of course, you divide that differential in half to get your home field advantage or home court advantage. And while a lot of people use the 4, 4.5, 5, in reality, depending on the conference, for example, I live in Las Vegas, the Mountain West Conference, the home court advantage is basically 2 points.
Much lower, right.
Much lower, because a lot of these teams are very good traveling teams. And they all have basically the same type of arenas. It's not like some have huge arenas, some have small. They're all basically in the same general area. And they all have basically the same type of attendance. Now, New Mexico may be one. BYU, when they were here, they were another that drew a little bit better and had a little bit more intense
And the pit,
crowds.
Back in the day was stronger than lately.
But overall, it's about 2. But there's other conferences that go all the way up to 6.5.
Yeah, if you give Duke 4 for home court, you're going to be fading them all year, and you're going to get crushed.
Yeah,
you can't
it's a little bit different in every single
Duke
court.
4 points for home court.
But it's a good start right there. Say your minimum in your conference is, let's say, Colorado State. A middle-ranked team of the Mountain West would be 2, and then you go from there.
Right.
And then you would say, well, possibly there's other teams. Like Boise, although they're new to this conference, they've had a little bit better home court advantage in their prior conference. So you got to make your little adjustments for that. And a lot of people, the problem they make is they will give the BYUs maybe a 7-point home court advantage, and then the next year they come in and they got a lot of freshmen playing, and of course it's down. They do very, very bad. In fact, last year BYU, as an example, had a better spread, points over and above the spread on the road than they did at home,
right?
Which doesn't happen very often. So you're going to find those years, and if you run into one of those years, you're going to really lose a lot of money. So it's better to get your entire conference and use that
makes perfect sense
as an example, and then just go from there depending on who's coming back, how many starters are coming back, how many freshmen are going to see a lot of minutes. So it's a good starting point, and a lot of people use it based on the entire year. In reality, you should only look at the conference games, because as I said,
there's a cupcake central in a lot of games.
So throw off your numbers.
The one thing I would add also is, with all the realignments and all the team switching conferences, I think you really need to factor that into your handicapping. UNLV hasn't played at Boise,
right?
And then the same thing, Boise hasn't played at UNLV. So when those teams that it's a conference game, but it's the first time in that arena, or the first time they're traveling, I think you got to make a slight adjustment for that.
Yep, you definitely do. And it's interesting, like Nebraska went to the Big Ten this year. Nebraska had a big home field advantage in the Big 12, or home court, excuse me. Overall, the Big 12 has actually got a pretty big home court.
Right.
So does the Big 10. But it'll be interesting, because in the Big 12, you play more of a freelance game, more of an up-and-down game. In the Big 10, the refs call the physical game.
Yeah, and it's more half-court.
So it's even though your numbers will be very similar for home court between the two, it's going to be totally different for Nebraska playing a different style of play when they go to play in Big Ten country.
I agree. So there's a lot of excitement building for college basketball, one of my favorite sports. Anytime you have a sport where you get games every single day, if you're willing to put in the work, it makes it extremely beatable, because the odds makers have just as much time as you do, and a lot of times they're going off sheer power ratings. And there's information, I think, if you dig deep enough, with a lot of the school blogs, a lot of things like that, that you could pick up information that really isn't factored into the number. In the NFL, Troy Polamalu coughs, it's going to be all over the internet, if they're going to know. But when it comes to college basketball, like you said, there's so many teams, a lot of times these lines are just based off nothing but power ratings. It's that little bit of information and little things like Bryan said, adjusting for home court, that you could really gain an edge. We're going to be back and cover one more college basketball how-to video, and that's taking advantage of the early season polls.